Good. Gather around, gather around. Don't be shy. See, the mayors are never shy about getting close together. Excellent. Everybody good? Okay. Well, first I want to thank all my fellow mayors and leaders of civil rights organizations who have gathered with us today at Gracie Mansion. This is the beginning of a very powerful partnership between America's mayors and our strongest voices for fairness and equity that are our civil rights leadership. We had a conversation that started this morning on the ways we're going to work together to confront some of the challenges we face today in America. And one of the things that was immediately striking as each mayor went around the room and each leader went around the room is how much of a common experience we're having in every part of the country. Cities of all different sizes, we're facing the same realities. And we are ready to work in common cause to address these issues, both locally and in Washington. I want to give a special thanks to the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, my colleague, Mitch Landrieu, the mayor of New Orleans, for his leadership. He has done extraordinary things in his city, including powerful actions for equity and fairness, and working with another man who had been a mayor in New Orleans a long time ago, Mark Moriallo, I have the honor of introducing in a moment. The president of the Urban League. They had a powerful vision of what this alliance could mean. And we talked way back in New Orleans when you gathered the leadership of the Conference of Mayors about making this something permanent and lasting, and that we would kick this off here at Gracie Mansion. I also want to give a special thanks to the mayor of Columbia, South Carolina, and the Vice President of the Conference of Mayors, Steve Benjamin, for his leadership. Look, the reality is we understand we have to speak with one voice if we're going to have an impact, especially given everything we are seeing on the national scene. And there was a lot that was discussed today and many different elements of the plan that we'll be working on going forward. And you'll hear more about that from Mayor Landrieu and from President Morial. I want to talk about one issue we all discussed today that will affect all of us, that is a danger to America's cities and is the kind of thing that often gets overlooked, and we have to start working on it right now, and that is the 2020 census. You'd think something as innocuous as a census couldn't do much harm. Well, unfortunately, the census is a true measure. Whether it's done accurately or not, it becomes the medium through which major decisions are made about money and power. It's as simple as that. The census determines representation in the Congress. The census determines how federal funds will be distributed. The difference can be in the billions. An accurate census can lead to billions of dollars more funding. An inaccurate one can lead to the loss of billions of dollars. In the case of New York City, that's literally the magnitude we're talking about. In the case of New York State, we're talking the potential of losing 1 or 2 House seats, depending on the outcome of that census. Now, look, no one here would begrudge any outcome if it was based on the honest facts. Our problem is we've seen in previous censuses that there wasn't fair representation because there wasn't the right kind of outreach and all of our people were not counted. And that was before the atmosphere that has been created by the Trump administration, which is likely to discourage many immigrant Americans from coming forward and being counted. So look, the stakes are very, very high. We are going to start working together, starting now, to both prepare all of our cities to get the count we actually deserve of our people, to work with our civil rights allies to make sure all of their reach comes into play and that we reach every corner of every neighborhood of every city of America. But we also are going to push the Trump administration, despite the tone it's set, to do the things that are needed to make the census real. First of all, a director for the U.S. Census needs to be named right away. It will be on us very soon. This work needs to start now to be able to get an accurate count of this entire country in just a few years. Second, we're going to push the Congress to fully fund the census outreach operation. Look, if it isn't done right, if we see a purposeful effort to undercount, again, the ramifications huge for every part of this country, but also for any sense of fairness and justice. We've seen a very painful reality of this president trying to undermine the Affordable Care Act by not doing outreach. Well, if they try something like that with the census, it literally means disparity will be created in this country based on not even portraying the truth about the American population, and we can't let that happen. Here in New York, I'll just note we're going to be establishing early next year a New York City 2020 Census Office to get to work on building the framework we need, and we will appoint a census coordinator for the city. We're all going to make sure we're ready to get the job done. So this is one example of many things we talked about today and many efforts that we can work on together in this powerful coalition of mayors and civil rights leaders. And it couldn't come at a better time. With that, again, it's a special pleasure because he understands the life of a mayor, and he's done outstanding work as the president of the National Urban League. And it's a great joy to have Mark Morial here with us today at Gracie Mansion. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
First of all, good afternoon. Let me thank Mayor Bill de Blasio and the First Lady for their graciousness in hosting all of us here at Gracie Mansion today. And let me just underscore that in the room today and around the table, we had leaders of major American cities convened by Mitch Landrieu and the United States Conference of Mayors, and leaders of national civil rights and NGO organizations that the National Urban League convened. This was an historic gathering to bring these sets of leaders together right now in 2017 to confront the challenges we face as a nation and to look for shared solutions. We have a list of those who attended, and of course many had to depart to catch trains and planes to fly back and are not present at this press conference. With the discussion today, I would characterize as substantive, passionate, thoughtful, and also long-term and short-term in our thinking. So what I'd like to do just for a minute is outline a few areas where we as, on one hand, mayors, and on the other hand, national civil rights and NGO leaders have determined we are going to come together to act. So number one, today, the U.S. House of Representatives narrowly passed a fiscal blueprint for the nation. That fiscal blueprint includes within it $1.5 trillion in non-specific cuts. We believe that that budget blueprint will necessarily, if it should become law in terms of the Appropriations Act, damaging to America's cities, damaging to the people that reside in American cities, and lead to cuts in Medicare, Medicaid, ACA subsidies, community development block grants, aid to education, home, all of the tools that all of us work for and that we utilize to build stronger communities, stronger neighborhoods, stronger families, and stronger people. That budget resolution, if you will, also is the framework under which a proposed tax plan that the President has proposed and that the Congress is considering would find its way to law based only on 50 votes. At the end of the day, the tax plan is lopsided because most of its benefits go to the wealthiest of Americans. The budget plan is flawed because it contains within it cuts that would damage people. We are going to resist, but really less resist, but work for a better plan. America can and should do better. Second, right now, there are 800,000 dreamers in the United States. These dreamers are from every region, every state, every ethnic group, and every community. These 800,000 dreamers are not eligible for welfare or government subsidies. They pay $2 billion in state and local taxes. They have a 91% employment rate. 65,000 graduate from high schools on an annual basis. 10,000 graduate from colleges every year. They represent $60 billion in tax dollars if we were to deport them, and the nation would lose $280 billion in lost economic contributions. We are joined together and united that we will fight hard to ensure that these dreamers, our young people, our children, the people that represent the best of this nation, are going to be protected. Number three, I want to join Mayor de Blasio in saying that we are united in saying we want to ensure that the 2020 census is fair and accurate. I served in 2010 under appointment by President Obama as the chair of the National Census Advisory Committee. If President Obama had not taken office in 2009, the 2010 census would not have been as successful because the president took office, understood the underfunding that he inherited from the previous administration, and fixed that problem the first 6 to 8 months he was in office. We are greatly concerned that the census is underfunded, it is without leadership, and for all of the reasons Mayor de Blasio outlined, all of us have to be united in ensuring that the count is absolutely complete. And then, bigotry and hate, racially motivated violence. The mayors have been, the civil rights leaders have been, and will continue to be a moral voice for this nation. Simply because others may miss their responsibility to be the moral compass in times of challenge, we will not shirk our responsibility to try to unite the nation around shared values and to say that bigotry and hate, racially motivated violence is unacceptable, it's un-American, and it's inconsistent with the type of nation that we want to build for our children. There are a number of other long-term issues: criminal justice reform, community policing, workforce development, affordable housing, the ongoing need to enforce and protect civil rights that we also discussed. But what we committed to today is to reconvene in January at the point in time when the U.S. Conference of Mayors meets, to bring the civil rights leaders and the mayors back together to further our conversations and also to work on more precise and specific policy agendas. This day was historic. Mayor Landrieu, thank you for your leadership. All colleagues and friends who were here, thank you for your leadership. And again, Mayor de Blasio, there's no better place for us to gather than Gracie Mansion. Thank you. Mayor Landrieu.
Thank you. Mayor Morial, I want to thank you for joining with me, and Mayor de Blasio, thank you as well for bringing together this incredible group of leaders across America. I am the president of the United States Conference of Mayors. We are a bipartisan organization. We represent 1,400 cities across America. We have many of our fellow mayors with us today, and our CEO, Tom Cochran, is here. Mayor Morial, who was our leader when he was the mayor of the city of New Orleans and now is ascended to be the president of the Urban League, and I came together with Mayor de Blasio and others and said, you know, somebody's got to stand up, create partnerships, and begin to heal a divided nation. And that is what today was meant to be a first step towards. So you have individuals that represent organizations that represent the multitude of American citizens as we speak. As the mayor said, we believe this was an historic day. One of the really wonderful things that came out of this morning is, notwithstanding the fact that everybody up here thinks that we are a pivotal moment in our city's history, where we're going to have to choose to go forward or go backwards, everybody in this room remains optimistic and hopeful that American citizens will join together so that our country can come back together and to speak as one. It is important at this moment in time to recognize where we are and to stand up and forcefully talk about the issues of hatred, of bigotry, of racism, to speak very clearly that that is not the American way. Those are not shared American values, and we will stand against that. Also, going forward, we're going to continue to work, build partnerships between and amongst our organizations to come up with common principles of governing going forward, and then finally begin to work on the specific issues that President Morial spoke about in the short term and in the long term. There are some immediate things that are before Congress as we speak: tax reform, the budget that the mayor spoke about, the Dreamers Act, which we all unanimously support and hope that they get to right away, and then the long-term issues. But the most important message about today is the way that we are going to do that. We're going to bring our organizations together. We're going to find common ground. We're going to speak to the importance of unity in the country and healing in the country, because it's very important that we speak very, very clearly that that is the most important American value. So I look forward to working with all of the men and women that are standing behind us. We look forward to our meeting. We're going to invite all of the CEOs from America to join us. So the business community, the political community, the civil rights community will begin to come together and try to heal and speak with one voice. And we are going to do that, and it's going to be fine. Thank you. Questions? Anybody with questions? Yes.
I wonder if for any of the mayors who are interested in weighing in, what you think of the apparent reluctance on the part of Congress to ban bump stocks.
Well, I mean,
look, it's a continuation of a reluctance to directly confront the need for gun safety regulatory overhaul, I'll call it. And notwithstanding that, we should note that many states have taken steps on their own accord, for example, to require background checks. Some states have taken steps to make it more difficult for domestic abusers to get a gun in their hands. But the mayors, I think, and civil rights leaders have borne great witness to the human pain and suffering of Las Vegas, the human pain and suffering of Mother Emanuel Church, the human pain and suffering of Sandy Hook, the human pain and suffering of Columbine and Orlando and San Bernardino, and need I go on. The gun violence is senseless. And the failure of our national government to act is a tragedy, but it's not stopping mayors, community leaders, some at the state level for doing everything they can to ensure that our citizens are safe and that they take steps. And so I am personally, and the National Urban League is disappointed and to some extent outraged that Congress would not act to, in fact, ban a device which is really designed to evade the law. And that's all it is a device to evade the ban on machine guns so that you can take a semi-automatic weapon and make it a rapid fire. It's disappointing and it's a tragedy.
Yes.
Can you speak to that issue as well?
I agree with President Morial, and I think the bottom line is if you look at what's happening in this country, a clear majority of Americans would like common sense gun safety legislation. They don't want to see mass killings. They don't want to see assault weapons in the hands of folks who mean to do harm to others. They don't want to see folks with mental health challenges have access to weapons. Lord knows they don't want to see someone who's on the terror watch list and can't go on a plane still be able to walk into a gun shop and get a weapon. So I think that's the shape of things to come, but it's going to be a lot of work to get to that day in this country. We have to get to the day where the Congress catches up with the views of the American people.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering whether you see this group as part of the resistance to the Trump administration, given the things that you've said so far, or do you think there's going to be some bargaining? I mean, you describe yourself as bipartisan.
Well, let me address this group has come together as a group of individuals that represent a large number of Americans. In most of the cities in America, 85% of the people live now. And we recognize our responsibility to speak to Washington, D.C. about what the executive branch of the federal government can do, or the executive branch of Congress, when they're doing things that we think will be helpful and things that will be harmful. And we recognize that, and we will do that. But the other reason we're here is because mayors across America, when we act in unity, when we act with our partners, can actually create national policy without the federal government even there. Now, we would prefer that they're there. We think that America works better when the federal, state, and local governments are working in unison, horizontally and vertically. But if they're not going to show up, then the mayors of America, which are becoming the cities, the most immediate laboratories of innovation and change, can affect the lives of Americans in a real basis. Mayors of America do not govern in principle. We govern in reality. We govern in real time. Congress can take 2 years to do something. We can't. Things that we speak of hit the ground the next day. And so one of the things that we're doing now is trying to use our collective power to actually impact the ground as we speak. We also, as President Morial said earlier, want to call the nation into awareness on the blueprint that Congress is setting, for example, on the budget that they passed today. That's a hide-the-ball budget. Nobody knows where those $1.5 trillion in cuts are specifically coming from because they did not say. But we know that everything rolls downhill. And every one of those cuts that are contemplated in that budget are cuts to things that people on the ground are going to need for health, jobs, safety, et cetera, which is why we're calling on Congress to be open, transparent, and at least stand in the purpose that at least they speak. And we're hoping that as that budget gets over to the Senate, there'll be more open, robust, and transparent communication. As we sit here on the issue of the dreamers, this is a real and imminent problem. You have children in America right now that are afraid to come out of their homes. They're worried if when they come home from school, their parents are still going to be there. This is a major issue that the country, at least it seems to me, from all of the polling data that we see, there's a broad consensus in the country that we have to protect the 800,000 dreamers that we hear. We ought to go ahead and do that and get that off of the plate. That's something that Congress, so we will continue to speak that truth to power. But in the meantime, we'll continue to organize ourselves on the ground so that we actually make things happen in our city that mayors have to pay attention to every day. And that's one of the reasons why we need the partners who are here with us to help us get better.
Can I just add one quick thing? Rich, to your question, you know, there's different organizations out there that are part of the resistance, but this is something I think that's powerful in a different way, because the Conference of Mayors is bipartisan. We're working with the civil rights organizations and the nonprofit organizations. But look at what commonality has been found between Republican and Democrat mayors on the issues we're talking about here. Our Republican colleagues were deeply involved in the effort to protect the Affordable Care Act. I don't know if you were on some of the conference calls we had for the media where, you know, there's just as many Republican mayors speaking with just as much passion about what it would mean to their cities if the Affordable Care Act were lost. The same on the Dreamers. A lot of Republican mayors have come forward, shoulder to shoulder with Democratic mayors and the civil rights community, calling for the DREAM Act federally. So I think you're going to see something that's another element of this moment in history. The resistance organizations, I think, are doing amazing work. But here's another interesting phenomenon. Local governments bonding together with the civil rights community in a structural coalition, but that includes Democrats and Republicans both on a lot of these issues.
Yes. Is there any specific type of alternative to state and local tax exemption that you all are looking toward pushing through?
The state and local tax exemption, I don't want to get too complicated on this, but to eliminate it violates a basic principle of taxation. Why should an American pay a tax on a tax? Why should you pay a tax on a tax you pay to the city of New York or the state of New York? All that means is that you are being double taxed. And it's surprising to me that anyone that labels themselves as a fiscal conservative would in any way associate themselves with such an absurd idea.
You know, there are certain Stephen Benjamin's going to address this. Who's our leader on this effort in a minute. But, you know, in politics, people say things that are upside down, like less is more. On this issue, they're trying to say that a tax cut, this is a tax increase. In a bill that's designed to cut taxes, this is a tax increase. It's a double taxation as more merit. So it's, again, another hide the ball initiative. And, of course, the mayors of America have been standing up on this issue. Our leader has been our Vice President, Mayor Stephen Benjamin, who will address the issue with specificity.
Well, I'm not sure I can get more specific than Mark Morial's response, because that just went to the heart of the matter. I think I'd take somewhat dispute with just the premise that this is something that needs to happen, ought to happen. This is one of the pillars of the very first tax code passed in the United States in 1913. One that you find broad and strong support, that this concept of double taxation just makes no sense. And this effort being led amazingly by those who might characterize themselves as fiscal conservatives, to require a family in my community in 29204 in Columbia, South Carolina, that's paying an adjusted gross income of earning $48,000 a year, that they ought to pay $2,000 more in taxes to give tax cuts to the various wealthiest Americans in the entire country, that they ought to not be able to deduct their state and local taxes, but corporations are still allowed to do so. There's something fundamentally unfair about that, and we've pulled together a good and strong coalition of Americans against double taxation, and we're actively advocating on behalf of working families and middle-class families all across this country. And we believe we're being heard. We're going to keep pushing, and we're not going to stop.
What can you say about people who are going to be afraid to participate in the census because of fear of being deported, or, you know, given this climate that we're in?
Let me start, and I don't know if any of our colleagues want to join in on this one, but look, it's a very real fear. We know right now around the country that there are good, hardworking immigrants who fear any engagement with local officials because of the fear of deportation. And, you know, we in this city and a lot of cities around the country have made really clear we're not going to ask documentation status, starting with our police force. And that's been a rule in New York City for decades. We want and need our fellow New Yorkers, and it'll be true in any city, to come forward and engage the police, engage the school system, our public hospitals, et cetera. But we see real fear out there. So imagine if it's sometimes gotten hard to convince someone to come get the health care they need, or get their kid the education they need, or come forward to the police if you've been a victim of a crime. Well, how on earth do we expect people in immigrant communities to feel comfortable when the census taker comes to town, right? We've got to make clear that it's safe, that it's a valuable thing to participate in for all members of all communities. We've got to make clear that there's going to be real outreach to truly and accurately count our population. I mean, think about this. This is, we've all are very concerned about some of what we see around the country in terms of voter suppression. This is an even higher level of voter suppression if you think about it. This is ignoring the actual number of people in any city or in any state, acting like they don't exist if the outreach is not done right, and then lowering the representation level for that state. The suppression happens before people even get to vote if you have fewer representatives that you send to Washington. So this is real serious stuff, and we're going to have to overcome this atmosphere to get an accurate count, and that's something we're all going to have to work on.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Well, let me give you a little more height. Hold on. Hold on. We have a little secret trick here. You're about to get, oh wait, now of course it's stuck. You're not going to get more height right now.
She's mighty. Cindy Benavides with LULAC. I would say that right now, you know, as we speak with many Latinos across the country and our immigrant community, there is real fear. When you have children who are coming home or going to school and they're so stressed that they're losing their hair, when you have parents that are afraid to send their children to K through 12 because they don't know who will knock on their door, that's real fear. And so when we're looking at the census, and given the current political climate and the rhetoric and the target that we feel on our backs, we feel that we will be undercounted. And it's because of the current climate. And then I want you to add the layers of, what about if you live in a rural community? What about if you live in a community that's not accessible? So when we're thinking about the census, it is a real challenge. It is a real problem. We are so happy that the mayors are coming together and looking for solutions to make sure that every American in the country is counted.
Thank you very much. All right. Good.
Thank you all so
All
much.
right, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.